Welcome, everyone. You have tuned in to the Python Pulse live stream, which we have every second Friday of the month at this time, 11 a.m. Pacific. I am your host today, Sarah Kaiser, standing in for the amazing Don Wages. I am a Python developer advocate here at Microsoft, and I am super excited to have a great episode again for you this month with an amazing guest. Let's see who's joining. And also mute the YouTube version of me talking at a 2-second delay. Yeah, if this is your first time joining, welcome. And if you're joining us again, welcome back. Let's see. So for the topic for this week, we'll be talking about end-to-end testing with Playwright with the amazing, here, I'm going to get some announcements up here. Oh, hi, Cyril. How's it going? Awesome. Oh, cool. Hi, Lassendu. Hopefully I got that right. Yeah, so for this week, some fun announcements that we've got. The Azure Developer CLI has just pushed an even newer version, 1.2. The Azure Developer CLI is an open source command line tool that accelerates the time it takes for you to go from kind of locally developing your app to deploying it in the cloud. I think like from the Python space, it kind of reminds me of like cookie cutter or things that basically can help you write infrastructure as code or templating as code and just actually deploy your app like with just from the command line AZD app, which honestly is some of the most exciting ways I've interacted with stuff in the cloud. We also have the Python SDK support. The Azure Python SDK now supports vector search, which is a really cool new feature. You can see it actually implemented in some of our Python samples that use OpenAI. So definitely give that a go. Let's see. On September 7th, we'll be having the Azure Developer Python Day. So it's designed specifically for you, the Python developers, and we'll be showing off some cutting edge cloud development techniques that can save you time and money while providing kind of the best experience both for your developers and any customers of your work. There'll be lots of experts, like folks like myself and like our guest Pamela, showing off different parts of our cloud service offerings for developers, for compute to data services, serverless computing, cloud native, all kinds of stuff. And lastly, but not leastly, it's a new month, so it's a new VS Code release. The release for this August has some really nice new Python improvements, like the Python extension dev container for contributors. The debug and pytest discovery support has been made a lot better. And now support for the npm package for Python, the Python extension API. So an easy way if you want to contribute, I think, to the Python extension. So yeah, don't forget to update or you'll be like me and have an update pending for like 6 months. No, I just have way too many versions installed. But yeah, that I think is the majority of our announcements. You can find all of those at aka.ms/pythonpulse/episode/9/show notes. But with that, let's actually get on to the exciting cool stuff. Let's bring on Pamela. Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
I'm very excited, as you know.
I am also very excited because Pamela is one of my fellow Python developer advocates, and she does a lot of web and web testing, accessibility, teaching, all kinds of amazing stuff. But let's maybe start with an obvious question. What is Playwright? And then we can take a look at our profile real quick that we made for the show today and get into what your demo.
All right. So yeah, we are going to be talking about Playwright for today's stream. And Playwright is an end-to-end testing system. If you've done end-to-end testing before, you've maybe used Selenium. That's what I've used for many, many years, going back, I don't know, 10, 15 years, for a long time. And, the idea is being able to do browser tests. And this is really nice for doing an end-to-end test, which it's a test that goes through a particular user flow. So you can say, like, okay, the user is going to open the website, fill in some stuff, and then click a button, and then see what happens. So that's an end-to-end test, and it can give you a lot of confidence that your web app is actually working, because look at that. And user was just able to do a successful flow through your application. Traditionally, it's been hard to do end-to-end testing because, you have to open up a whole browser to do it. And these tests have been known to be, flaky or slow. But Playwright has really tried to improve the reliability and the speed and just the general overall developer experience of end-to-end testing. And I've been using it, for the last year, and have been really impressed. So I've started adding Playwright tests to, all of my apps, and I'm going to walk through some of them today so you can see how to use Playwright from Python. Now, Playwright is available in multiple languages and also multiple platforms. So you can use it from JavaScript, TypeScript, .NET, Java. But of course, this being the Python Pulse, we are going to be using it from Python. And, it's really fun to use from Python. I will say there are some features available for TypeScript and JavaScript that aren't available in Python. So, keep that in mind, that if you're also a Node.js developer, you might want to check out those extra features. But there's still a lot we can do in Python.
You could also file some issues on the project. If there are those features that you're like, ooh, I'd really like this to work for Python. Sweet.
Yeah, so that's Playwright. We do have a Viz Code profile to show off. So let me go ahead and show my Viz Code. A Viz Code profile is a way of bundling up a bunch of settings and extensions that you commonly use for some type of development. So, when you're working on a Python web app, you might want your Python web app profile. If you're working on data science, you might want your Python data science profile, and it would just bring in the right settings and extensions for that. So we have this Playwright Python profile, and I can show the contents of it. So what you can see is, I can hear myself echo, by the way. So what you can see in here, you can see settings that it can bring in, a UI state, and extensions. And you see, I put a lot of extensions in this profile. So a lot of these are just around the Python extension and the related extensions, so like Python and Pylance. So those are absolutely essential whenever I'm doing Python work. We also have, I've got GitHub Copilot and Copilot Chat, because I do like to use that when I'm developing web apps, because it's very good at the kind of repetitive code that comes up a lot for web app development. I've got some HTML and CSS related extensions that just make it easier to do HTML and CSS, some accessibility, some formatting. So this is a good lot of extensions for doing web app development. And we can also look here to see all these extensions installed, and I could click on one of them and get more information about what it provides. So like if we look at there is this let's see, HTML, CSS.
Look at the can I use one. That was the one that I found.
I can do that one. Yeah, I was testing this one out. So can I use, if you don't know, caniuse.com is an incredibly useful website that I've been using for years in order to figure out if I can use new HTML, JavaScript stuff, because the web is moving so fast and it's just always got new stuff in it. Like I took a brief break from web development to, go on a Buddhist retreat and go to Burning Man and all that stuff. And I came back and the web supported so many new things. So I'm really thankful to have Can I Use, because then I can, look and see whether something's supported. And so this extension actually builds it in. So like, let's say if I was going to go here and add, I was like, oh, I'm going to add a video tag. And so what I can do is actually click on this and then I do Control C. And you see at the very bottom there, can you see that? It says, Can I Use? And it's got all these check marks. Let me do it again so you can see it show up. It's got all these check marks that show that, yes, I can use this in all the browsers I care about. So that's an example of a super cool extension that you can use for web development. Here's another one. This one is the CSS peak. So let's say we see this div class equals inner, and I'm wondering like, oh, what is that inner rule? So just like you can do like go to definition in Python files, you can do go to definition on your CSS classes, and we go to it, and then boom, that's how it's defined. So this is really cool too. So lots of cool extensions like that. All right.
Sweet.
And do they have the links for do we have links for the profiles for them? Did we share that?
Yeah, maybe we can put up there we go. Yep. We've got links here that if you click, will take you to a preview of this profile in your browser that you can then click and say, hey, I'd like to add that to my VS Code local settings or your synced settings. So yeah, give that a go and see if that helps speed up your Python and web development.
Yeah, and you can find your profiles, whatever, you can check here, click on the little gear menu, click profiles, and then you can see which one you currently are using. And you can import, you can export, you can share your profiles. Sarah has a really nice blog post that talks about profiles and dev containers. So plug for Sarah's blog post. Sarah, maybe you can drop that in the chat.
I will find that and then give me 1 sec.
All right. So now we've got that profile, and I have this this project loaded. This is actually my personal website, which is a Python web app. So it is pamelafox.org. And so you can see what it looks like deployed. It's deployed actually as a static web app. So you can use Flask to make static web apps using the Frozen Flask package. But it is actually written as a Flask web app. And I just deployed in different ways. So I've got my app, and so let's say I want to run end-to-end tests, right? So I want to make sure that somebody who goes to my web page is able to, load the web page and then is able to, click around and go to my blog post and look at a blog post tag, right? I want to make sure all of this works. So I could write an end-to-end test to do that user flow. So I'm going to do that using Playwright. So I've already started up a really, really basic test Playwright. And so we'll step through this. So the first thing we need is, we need to actually have Playwright installed. So we can look at our dev requirements here. I've got a couple things. I've got Playwright, so that's a Python package. I also have their official plugin for pytest, which is pytest Playwright. So I am going to be using the pytest framework here for testing. You could, in theory, use unit tests, but Playwright has a plugin especially for pytest, and it works really well with pytest. So I'm going to use pytest and pytest Playwright. So I've got all of that installed there. And then I've got a few other tools as well. So then I also, so I need to install that package. And you also need to install the actual browsers, right? So in addition to having the Python package, you do need to install the browsers. So your typical installation process is going to start off with, installing your packages. And this should be really fast because I've already done this. So it's probably just going to be like, boom, 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 boom. See, boom, boom, boom. It's already got all that stuff. Great. And then the next step would be to actually tell Playwright to install the browsers, because Playwright, it's literally running your tests in a browser. So you actually have to have those browser binaries downloaded. So I can say Playwright install with deps, And this installs both the browser binaries, so for Chromium and WebKit and Firefox, and then it also installs any dependencies. Fortunately, I've already done that, so that was fast. Normally it would be a little slow. And now finally I can run the tests. So let's look at this test here. So you'll see I have this import from the Playwright package. So I import the page fixture. So this is a pytest fixture. And then I also import the expect fixture, which we'll use soon. And then from Flask, I import URL for, which is just a way of coming up with the URL for a particular route. But you can use, so here I'm doing a Flask app, but you could use Playwright with a Django app, with a Fast API app, and we'll actually I'll show like a Fast API app later. So you can use it for any, any app, as long as you can open up a page for it. So here I have the start of a function. So this function does take in a few fixtures, and this is just setting up a local server for the test. There's various ways you can do this depending on what framework you're using. I'm using a fixture that gives me a URL for a local server that's running. So you can imagine this URL is really something like localhost 0689, and then it gets the route, and so it's just going to be slash. So that's what it's really doing behind the scenes here, is coming up with this URL, and then we tell Playwright to go to that URL. Okay, so this is the basics. Sarah, if at any point you have any questions or see any, please do ask anything in the chat, because we can, we're live right now. Yeah.
Am I back?
Yeah. Oh.
If anyone has any questions, please don't be shy. Put them in the chat. I am watching and interacting there. So yeah, what's as you were hovering over some of those functions there, Pamela, there was some big pop-up things. What was that?
So this is coming from the Python extension or Pylance. They always come bundled together, so I'm never sure which one does definitions. Is that Pylance?
Pylance is a language server, like kind of both parts are needed.
Yeah. So it's coming from the Python extension bundle, right? So we can see, we can get more information about these things. And I'm using Python types here just to get a little more hints, right?
Yeah, for types.
So if we do like page dot, we should actually find here, this is everything available on the page. So that's one of the great things about using Python types, is we can start to actually get IntelliSense here and get that, get this nice handy drop down.
Raphael asks, can you use Playwright with a simple index.html file?
Yeah, you definitely can. I have that in another repo where I do that. But you could just imagine going to, page.goto. I mean, your index.html, you do need to have that, served off a server somewhere. It could just be a local server, right? It could just be, localhost 8080, index.html. So that, that would be fine. Or it's going to go to, you can even run it off your live server, right? So we could actually run this off, we could actually run it off my live server, and that might be something you want to do for some cases. Like if you want to test, make sure the live server is good. And so you can just go to that live server instead. So then we can, run that test and it'll run. So yeah, there's many ways of, you just need some sort of URL you can put here, whether it's a local URL or whether it is a live URL. It needs, just imagine a browser. If you had a browser open, how would you get to that index.html and just encode that in your test? Great question.
Yeah. I think I've seen you've shown me some cool applications where like you use this to make accessibility audits. So like you don't have to even own the source. Like you can just point it to, if the page exists, you can run the tests on it. So.
Yeah, exactly. You can audit other people's web pages. So this is a really basic test, which really isn't testing much. It's testing that it can go to the page, which is cool. Like, I guess it's probably not going to work if I go like this, and I'll get, assuming that domain doesn't exist. This is just wild shot in the dark. We do get a failure. So it was not able to find that domain. So, we're testing something, but not, not could use your autocomplete to figure out what to do. You could use Copilot to check stuff, but Playwright actually has this tool to help you generate the code for a test. So we're going to use that tool. So we're going to do Playwright code gen, and I need to point it at a running server. So let me go ahead and launch this Flask app locally. Oh, I didn't want to. It did it all in the same window. Okay, here. Okay, I'll launch it in this window. All right, so we've got it running locally. And then what I'm going to do over here is say Playwright code gen and then give it this local URL. And so what it's doing is actually, you can see it's launching 2 little Chromium instances. So one of them has the web page, and you can notice how it's giving me all this highlight action here. And then you see here this code editor on the side. So what's going to happen is as I click over here, we're going to see the code fill out over here. So let's say that the test I want to do is to load this page, then go to the blog post link. So I'm going to click that, and you'll see that now it fills in with a line of code there. And then I'm going to click on Python. And so now we see another line of code there. And then I'm going to make sure that I can click on that. And now I'm actually on my blog. So I think that's good for the end of, testing my own web page. So now what I can do is,
Hey, Pamela. Ricardo was asking, I think when you put in the totally doesn't exist domain, was that an assertion failure or an actual exception?
That was an assertion error. Let's see if we still have that in here. I can't even remember which terminal that was in. It was here. So it said it failed, and it would have been treated as an assertion error by Playwright. So we can try it again and see how it looks. So why don't we'll do that. So let me go ahead and grab this code, and we'll make another exception. So let's go and copy this code. And we'll stop here. Okay. Now we've got, got this code copied. Let's see, Ricardo wanted to see, let's go ahead and see that exception again and see what it looks like. So we're just going to make it fail. Fail. Okay. All right. So now I'm going to run this test again. Okay, so you can see that what we have here is an error. This actually looks a little bit, this is actually, you're right, this is an exception. So it still comes out as a failed test, but this is an exception happening. This is not being treated as an assertion. So very well observed, Ricardo. So let's get an actual assertion error, right? Because you're probably wondering, what is it? What does the assertion error look like in Playwright? So we have this here. Let's just run this now and make sure that this passes. And there we go. It passed. We can also run it with headed mode. So by default, it runs in headless mode, which means that you can't see the browser. But if you want, you can run it in headed. If you want to watch it happening, like you want to get your popcorn and just sit there. It happened too fast. This is actually going at a reasonable rate where you kind of just saw what happened. So it went through the steps and it closed it out. And headed mode is generally going to be slower. So I only use it like if I'm really, really want to watch it go by. You can even slow down your headed mode by, some amount, like, 3 seconds using the slow-mo parameter, which I think is really nicely named. And yeah, so Raphael asks, is there an option to watch the test in the browser? So that's what we're doing right now. This is one way we can do it. I am going to show another way we can do it as well. But we also wanted to see, okay, well, first let's see one other way that we can do it. No, let's add an assertion. All right. So when you want to do it, assertions, that's what you use expect for. So normally in PyTest, you're probably used to writing assert. So the issue with assert, and you see even Copilot wants to auto-complete that, but the issue with assert is that assert immediately checks, but expect, which is from Playwright, will do a wait. So it's waiting for something to exist, and then it's waiting for something to become true. So it's better to use expect when you're doing a Playwright test. So we can say like expect page, and this is where I always forget what to do. I think this is what I want. Yeah, to have title. Okay. So this should provide an assertion if it's wrong. So first, let's see if I did it correctly. And we'll just do it headless. See what happens. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, so I did that right. If I had the wrong title and I ran this test, then let's see what happens. Okay, so then we get a proper assertion error. So when you're using expect and when the thing doesn't match what it expects, behind the scene, that's an assert, and you'll get an assertion error when that's, not working. So think about, if you're used to PyTest, think about when you normally use assert and instead use expect, because then the Playwright is going to wait a little bit, because sometimes things take time, right? Things have to load. So it'll wait, some amount of time for something to eventually become true. And that's the difference with expect versus assert.
Got it. There is one other question that Clea Kelly asked, what advantages does Playwright have over Selenium? I know you kind of mentioned at the beginning, but what's a TLDR?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's some good blog posts that you can look for about this. But so Playwright lets you test in browsers, but most of the time it's using like not the full browser. It's using like Chromium versus all, the whole Chrome shebang. So it tends to be a little bit, I think, faster and more reliable for that reason. Versus Selenium, a lot of times with Selenium, you think you're actually testing in like the full-on browser. So that means that with Selenium, you actually can, I think, use a lot more browsers and like specific variants of them. With Playwright, you're not usually doing the full browser. So I think that's behind the scenes a kind of difference, because there's some reason Playwright tends to perform a bit better and a bit more reliably, and I think that's because it's not using quite the full browser experience. But you can do browser channels, so you can actually test with a fuller version of the browser if you specify the channel, like browser channel Chrome or Microsoft Edge. But they do warn that then you might run into more issues around like security, because you're bringing in Chrome with all of its settings. So I think that's kind of one of the underlying differences. But there's some good blog posts out there that compare Playwright and Selenium. So I recommend doing some searching to see how other people have compared them as well. To me, they feel fairly similar. I guess the other thing with Playwright is that Playwright, so with Selenium, I would typically like use CSS selectors like classes and IDs, and even like attributes like data test ID equals my modal, in order to select things and find stuff on the page. Playwright specifically doesn't like that approach. They think of that as the last resort. So they prefer getting stuff according to how the user would see it, right? So the user sees a link that says blog post. The user sees a link that says Python. The user says a link that says this. So they try to find locators that are both unique. And so that's why you should use the code gen. The code gen, that's part of the reliability, is that the code gen tool will try to give you a locator. This is what we call a locator. It'll try to give you a locator that is both unique, but also is close to what the user would see, because they're really trying to get at simulating a user flow, and the user isn't looking for, you know, something that has an attribute of data test ID my modal. The user is looking for the modal that has the title, you know, my cool modal, right?
Wait, that's not how you browse all web pages, Pamela? Like, you just have the inspector open to the side?
Oh, I do. I definitely do. I had to page the other day, but he doesn't like when I do that. So most users don't always have their dev tools open. Most users aren't as cool as me. So yeah, that's actually a big difference. And that's a very different, for me, it's actually been a hard adjustment where I'm like, no, I'm used to being really specific with my, you know, CSS based selectors. So you can do CSS based selectors in code in Playwright, but the code gen tool will really try to get one of these kind of selectors first, like a user facing selector. Great question.
Sweet. Yeah, lots of folks were commenting. Eric is like, said that he just started working with Python, with Playwright, with Java and C#. Louise said Playwright is great for Shadow DOM. Like, yeah, this is really cool. Like, I've always, when I've made static sites and stuff in Python, which are like just like personal web pages, testing isn't exactly a thing, because I was just like, well, I will just go through every time it deploys and I will go click and do this. But this basically records me doing that and can formalize it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that one time where you forget to do that and then the whole site breaks down. So
we won't talk about that.
So I want to show another cool way that you can run these tests, right? So far I've been doing them all, you know, from the command here, but this does actually integrate with the VS Code debugger. And it's always really cool when you can use the debugger, right? So let's go ahead. Let me add another expect in here. And yeah, so let's just, you know, go with this. And then I'm going to go to my Python Playwright launch. I'll show you my launch.json. So I'm launching the pytest module, and I have to specify this pw debug equals 1. So that puts it in debugging mode. And then I'm telling it which file to do. So that is how I'm going to run this. So I'm going to say run. And then this is going to be really cool. Okay. So it opens up the browser. And then what you see here is that we have a debugger interface. Let me see if I can get it bigger. We have a debugger interface that's kind of like our normal debugging interface. You can see this little, you know, this little arrow here, except it's specifically for Playwright. So what I can do is step over, and there you see it goes to the web page. And then I'm going to step again, and it clicked on there. And now it's going to run this assertion, right? And you can see also what is happening out here. It's going to run this assertion. And you can see here that you can actually see the timeout. It's waiting, it's waiting, it's waiting. And then finally it fails. You know, and then if we continue, then we'll go back here and we'll see that it's, you know, expected it to be blog post, but it was actually this instead. So this is really cool, is that you can actually use the debugger. It's always really cool. I'm always so surprised when the debugger works for something, you know, because I'm so used to doing, let's be honest, I'm very used to doing print debugging, right? Like, you know, raise the hands who's doing the print debugging. We're all doing the print debugging. And there you go.
You can't see it. It's like half on screen. Yeah.
So I do print debugging all the time. But when I do use the VS Code debugger, I am so appreciative of it. And I'm so like, oh my gosh, technology is amazing. I can walk step by step through my Python web app backend code. It is so cool. Yeah. Console.log. Also, that's JavaScript. So, you know, we all do.
You have all your terminals open with like it's like in the Matrix I'm in. Yeah. That's what I think whenever I see someone like working with debuggers and stuff. I'm just like, this is crazy. Here's my little because like every time I add a print debugging statement, it's like to differentiate, like sometimes just more exclamation points.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Like classic, you know, print here, and then we have print here, right, or here. Yeah, not to be confused with here. But yeah, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, if you can use the debugger, it's really cool. So Remember that, and you can steal my launch.json. Here you go. Here it is. Take it. Okay, so now it should be running. So now let's so I think I've fixed everything, and I'm just running it in headless this time, and it passed. I do also want to show another Viz Code feature. There's the testing tab, and we talked about in the release notes that they're working on test discovery, so you can see all the tests that it discovered from my repo. So I have more than just a Playwright test. I also have unit tests because I like unit tests. So we've got this one, and we can, so we can run the test here as well, and it will also run from here. So that's another Viz Code tool that you can use with Playwright is, to run your pytest Playwright tests.
I've got a couple more questions in the comments before we move on here. So Raphael asks, does Playwright have a warning if you try to select a button that's in the DOM but hidden to the user?
Oh, it's a good question. I guess we'll just try it. So we're going to just make it display none. And here we go. Okay. ID equals hidden button, so stealth. Okay, really good. Okay, so
excellent.
So we're gonna do page get by. Can I just do ID get by selector get? I don't know. Let's see what our drop down here says that we can do with page. Page. Come on, give me my little drop down. I got too much going on. We're just gonna look at the docs. There are docs. Get by.
They're quite nice too.
Get by. What can we get by? Locator. There we go. Locator. I think it's just locator. Okay. Locator. And there we go. .click. I reckon that's it. We'll find out soon. Maybe we should use our debugger. Let's find out. Okay. Dun, 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 dun.
Let's see.
Okay, so we're going to go over, and then we're going to try to click it. It says attempting click action. Element is not visible. Uh-oh.
Good job, Playwright.
So it least thinks element is not visible. Let's try it with something that straight up doesn't exist, because I don't know also like if I wrote this wrong. So we'll do our usual thing to make it not exist, and then we'll try it again. So let's see here. So we're gonna go over. And then we're gonna click. So waiting for locator. And so it is waiting for locator. Yeah, so I think this time it's not even, it paused earlier this time. So indeed, it found that hidden button so stealth. But in the last time it said, waiting for it to be visible. So it does seem to wait for something to be user visible. So that is another really, really cool thing about Playwright. That was a really good choice.
Yeah, Eric says he thinks there's a default of 30 seconds. For that waiting, and raised another question earlier, which was one problem. Some controls click, they don't register the click, and he had a delay of 1,000 so that the close gets registered. Is there some sort of wait, or basically, is there other forms of delays that you might be missing?
Yeah, I have to look in that specific case. I mean, sometimes, like I've had situations where I have to, wait to make sure that, like, before doing an expect, like I wait to make sure that that my dynamically loaded JavaScript content has loaded. So I'll show an example of that. So that can be useful. But I have to look into that specific situation with the delay. So there is some information here. Yeah, we're talking about the timeout. The default timeout is 5 seconds. You can specify a custom timeout here. Oh, and you can even, in the to be visible, you can specify timeout here. Oh, and they're even using the fact in Python, you can use underscores in your numbers, which is little known fact. At least I didn't know it till very recently. So this is a timeout of 10,000. So that is cool. So you can override timeout at this level or at this level, which is handy.
Louis also says that if you do test.slow, it increases the delay increases the delay by 3.
Oh, I assume that must be like a fixture. That sounds like a fixture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's this nice pytest reference here. I wonder if they have slow. Okay, well, we have slow-mo. All right, so cool. Okay, so let's show a more complicated test, right? Because this is not the most exciting web page in the world. So
come on. Okay, everybody should look at Pamela's website and her blog post because I reference them very regularly. She has a lot of good stuff on there. Also, I love the color theme.
Thank you. Yeah, the rainbow. I recently added the rainbow. So take a look at, here's another one I have. And this one has a lot more Playwright stuff going on. So we've got, and this one's a fast API example. But here's the truth. Actually, I have the same example in Flask and Django. The Playwright tests are exactly the same. The only thing is different is the kind of setup stuff in the comp test, but the Playwright tests are the same. So that's the thing is like the Playwright tests are often fairly agnostic to, what your backend's written in. As long as you can get, a live, a server URL, then, your test can look similar. So here, we've got some regex. But let me look at the form fill out. Did we do our form fill out here? No, we did do some parameterization, some checking of URLs. So we're checking to make sure the URL is correct. We're checking the title. We're looking at some text content as well. So there's quite a lot more you can do here. So let me run these. And I'll point out that now I'm actually inside a dev container. So I'm no longer with my profile. I'm inside a dev container. I'm using the dev container because this app has a database and the dev container sets up Postgres database. So you can see here in the ports that there's a Postgres port running inside this container. And there's also the actual, application running in this container. And that's all possible because of the dev container definition here, which sets up a Postgres database. And once again, Sarah has a great blog post that talks about profiles versus dev containers. So check out that post if you're wondering when to use a profile, when to use a container, and when to use both.
I'll put it in the show notes. We did have a question. Can you use code gen using VS Code in Python?
Oh, yeah. So I had done that in this one. I used code gen. So I did code gen. And then at the running server, so this one was running on this URL here. So this will open up from VS Code. Oh, I think I'm not running it anymore. Let's see. Let's see. So you actually have to be running your server, and you can do it. So we run the server again, run the server. Okay. And then do the code gen. And so that opens up, and then we go, boom and boom, and we have the code gen here. So that does work from VS Code most of the time. Now, a point I want to make actually is that in this other one I'm using here, where I'm in a dev container, you are going to be a little more limited in how you use Playwright because we're in a container. And so it's not as easy to open up, browser windows from inside a container. So sometimes when I'm in a container, I actually have to use Playwright outside. So if I try to do Playwright code gen in here, I would actually end up with a little bit of an error. So we can still run, the pytest inside the dev container in headless mode. And you can see they're all passing. So this is actually running it in headless mode. But we don't have any way of getting the head to work in the container. We've been trying to figure out a way to make it work, but we haven't been able to get a headed mode to work inside a container. So what can you do if you're in a container? Well, you could, run from outside the container. So sometimes I do that. you could also do something called tracing. So this is my opportunity to show tracing. So what I'm going to do is turn tracing on. So I'm going to do tracing equals on. So this is another parameter we can do. Let me make this bigger so we can see. So we'll do tracing on. And it is now generating these trace zip files, and it's saving it into a local directory. So it's saving it into test results here. And you can actually see, you can see it getting populated as we go through the tests. So we'll wait for it to populate all of those. And there's quite a lot of tests here. And the reason there's so many tests is because we did parameterize it. This is a nice thing you can do in pytest, is that you can, parameterize your tests. So if you're doing the same sort of test over and over, you can go ahead and parameterize it. Okay, so I ran all the tests. And now what you'll see is that for every test, there is a trace.zip. So what can we do with that? We've got two things that we can do with it. We can go to this trace viewer, which is at trace.playwright.dev, and we can select the file. And let me go ahead and open like the Venus one. Open. Okay, this is so cool. This is like the timeline. Isn't it so cool?
Oh my goodness, I love this so much.
So this is the timeline of what happened. So we can start at the beginning, and you can go through, and it has screenshots along the way. So this is what this is really helpful for in particular, is if you're running your tests on CI/CD, and obviously you can't like run that with a head, because where's the head, with a visible browser. But what you can do is you could save those traces, and then if there is a bug, and there's a setting for tracing where you can say only save the traces if they're a failure, right? So tracing retain on failure. So that's perfect, right? If there's a failure, you're gonna look at that trace and you're gonna see what the heck happened, right? So this is so beautiful. Look at that, the little red thing. This is like the future little selection. And we go to the Venus page. She's got it. Oh, baby, she's got it. Okay. And then we close. So this is so cool. You can also do this. You can also take a look at it locally. So you can use a trace viewer locally. That's with, you do the Playwright show trace command. So I'm going to do that. I already have it open here, actually. So that's going to open up the same sort of UI here to be able to view the trace. But this is another thing where this Playwright show trace, when I'm inside the dev container, it's not going to work so hot because I'm trying to get it to open up a browser from inside a dev container, and that's like a little difficult. What options do we have here? A lot. Chromium, Venus. Okay. Trace.zip. Okay. And yeah, so I do get an error when I try to do it here, but I do get a little heart emoticon, so I feel better. So just keep that in mind. If you are working in a dev container, you're going to have a little more limitation into what you can do with Playwright in terms of opening browser windows from inside that dev container. But there's still so much you can do, and you can always run it outside the container as well. Okay, so that was traces. All right, do we have any questions before I move on?
Ed did comment that you were using a Mac and work at Microsoft, and I just said, yep, I'm the only one on my team who does not have a Mac, actually.
Yeah,
but I do pretty much only work in Docker containers, so.
Yeah, but it does mean I have a Mac and an M1, which means like I'm like solely responsible for filing all the M1 issues. So if you ever have M1 issues, you'll probably just find that I have filed that issue. But a lot of them are getting fixed, so that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I have 10 minutes to put a plug for testing accessibility with Playwright. I'm excited that we actually have time for this. I wasn't sure if we'd make it, but so What is accessibility? Accessibility is the idea of having a web page that can be usable by everyone, regardless of where they're coming from and their any sort of disabilities they may have. So an accessible web page, should be navigable. It should be understandable. It should have things that screen readers understand, like alt text. So there's lots of things that go into making an accessible web page. So I want to make sure that, the web pages I make are accessible and that, the code samples we put out are accessible. So I've been looking into how to automate accessibility testing using Playwright in combination with this other thing called Axe Core. So Axe Core is this engine, and it's actually written in JavaScript, which makes sense because it runs in a browser. So it's this JavaScript that runs in a browser that tries to discover things that are not accessible about a web page. And it has to run on an actual rendered web page, since some accessibility issues stem from the way something is rendered, right? Like something is hiding something else, or something doesn't have the right color contrast, that sort of thing. So it needs to run on a rendered web page, which makes it a perfect fit for Playwright, right? Playwright can render an actual web page. We can go in and we can programmatically inject the JavaScript into the page, get the results, and then analyze it in Python, which is pretty fun. So I made a little package to make that easier, since Python developers don't always want to write, JavaScript and mess with that. So that's my Axe Playwright Python package. And so here's an example of using it. So what I do is, I navigate to the page, and then I run Axe on the page, and then I check to make sure there are no violations. So let's go ahead and run that. So pytest, source tests, Axe analysis. And let's see. Okay, it's looking good so far. And I did parameterize this to check each of the pages. Okay, so right now the pages are accessible. Now, what would happen if they weren't accessible? So let's say that I added a source. And also point out that Axe cannot find every issue. It's going to find about 57% is what they say. So you do also need to do other things, but this can find at least some issues. So let's say I add this image, right? My cool picture of myself. So cool. And now I'm going to run my test again. And some of you might guess what kind of error I'm going to get here. We see a failure. And the error is, found one accessibility violation, rule violated image alt. Okay, it says I need to have alt text, alt attributes. So I'm going to go ahead and say, photo of Pamela. All right, and then I'll go ahead and rerun it. And yeah, we have a different error also, which is that this URL doesn't exist. So I'm not checking, every possible error here. That's a different one. We should have a 404 checker too, which would be really cool. And probably could do that with Playwright as well, actually, because we could just visit this image. So that'd be a very good thing to do too. But from an accessibility perspective, we do have an alt attribute now, and that's what it was looking for. Let me show another example of something we could do, like an accessible thing we could do. Like, so let's say we go and I change this color to pound CCC, or CCC, maybe 999. Let's do 999. So kind of a grayish color. Okay. And I'm going to run this test again. All right. And we see a failure. And what is the failure this time? What we see here is a color contrast, and we actually see a ton of nodes have this issue because it's propagated down to every node here now has a color contrast violation. So how can you fix a color contrast violation? Well, you could just say oh, let me just come up with a different color, but I do want to show how we could do this in the browser more easily. So let me run this app again. And let's see, open it up here. Okay, so now you can see I turned it to gray, and I'm going to use this Accessibility Insights extension, which does use Axe Core rules. And so I'm going to run FastPass on it. And it also shows those same rules, the color contrast. And the thing that's really cool, so now I'm going to exit. Now you see how it's highlighted all these things in red. And I can click on one, and then I can see it says insufficient color contrast. But what's really, really cool is it gives a recommendation. it says that if I want to be accessible and meet this success criterion, I can use 747474 instead of my current thing. So that's what I think is so cool about this extension, is that it gives you recommendations for colors you can use that are accessible. So you don't have to, keep trying guessing. You can just do it and see what happens. So now let's reload. And then I run it again and I do fast pass and we see there are no issues. So let's go ahead and run it again from here. Let's see. I always have too many terminals right here. So we'll run it here. And it fixed it. So that's a nice way of doing accessibility testing, is like use your pytest in order to make sure there are no violations. And then if there are violations, you can use a browser extension in order to, give you feedback about how to fix those and what's wrong. Okay.
I
3 minutes.
Also just added an issue to your, so I put in chat the link to the PyPy project page for this. I just filed an issue, so if somebody wants to contribute that, go for it.
Yes.
And Eric said that they did the same for Axe in Selenium. What he did was collect each page and the URLs as the tests ran and consolidated them into one final report.
Beautiful. Yeah. So there are some packages that do this in Selenium already. So I think like with Playwright being newer, we don't have as many Axe Playwright packages. So that's awesome that Eric did that with Selenium already. So I think if you've done stuff like this, like especially for Python, please write it up so that we can get more examples of how to automate accessibility checking. Because I think this is not something that a lot of people are like talking about, from what I could tell. Especially for Python. So please do share anything you're doing. I did write up 2 blog posts about my approach. So the one I just showed you was just checking to make sure there were 0 violations. Unfortunately, most of the time you are actually going to have some number of violations, and they're going to be hard to fix, maybe because you don't have time or because it's a really complicated, system, or you're like using a third-party JavaScript that is inaccessible in some way. So another approach you could use is snapshot testing. And I made a package to make this easier as well. So here I have this Axe pytest snapshot fixture. So it makes a snapshot of the violations for a page and then saves that snapshot in a snapshots folder. So here we can see this page has some violations, heading order, landmark, and region. So these are all violations that we would eventually like to fix. But for now, we want to make sure we don't have a regression in our violations, right? So that's the idea of snapshot testing. It's a way that we can both track our current issues and also ensure that we don't have additional issues. So I can run these tests here, and here we see it has 100%. Now let's say if I introduced, I have 1 minute left to introduce an error. Let's go. So let me introduce the classic, accessibility issue here. Okay. And then run it again. And we should hopefully get an error. Yes, we did. We got an error because the snapshot didn't match. So it says new violations found, either fix the issue or update your snapshots if for some reason you really can't fix the issue. So this, I think, is a really cool way of doing snapshot testing. And you can read my other blog post about how to do that. And it is now 12 o'clock. So thank you, everyone. This is really fun.
You are very, very prompt, Pamela. This is amazing. Do you have time for one question?
Yeah.
Because I did ask folks if they had any last questions, so I will honor that. So Swaggity says, I've used Puppeteer for years and Playwright when the team moved to Microsoft. Why is Selenium still so popular in industry when Playwright is clearly better and has been around for half a decade?
I think it's just discovery. I didn't know about Playwright. And the only reason I knew about Playwright is because of moving to Microsoft as well, and finding out about it. I think Selenium, is just so ingrained. It's been around for so long. And I think also like when you first thought about Playwright is like, well, how much better could it be than Selenium? But then of course I tried it and I was like, oh yeah, okay. I don't want to hate on Selenium too, because I've worked with that for a long time and they've done great stuff. But we're trying to make reliable end-to-end tests, and that's a big thing that, you know, Playwright is working on. So I think it's just, yeah, just getting the word out there. Like if you've used Playwright, you know, on your production apps and it's worked well, you know, just get that information out there. Like, you know, how long do your tests take to run? How many tests are you writing? Like we were debating today actually with my colleagues, like, okay, given that you have Playwright now, like do you use your typical testing pyramid where you have lots of unit tests and only a few E2E tests, or do you have mostly E2E tests? And these days we're actually, you know, tending to start more with E2E tests. So I think if you are using Playwright, especially from Python, you know, share the word, share the news. If you have any things you can package up, because there's also, if you search PyPy, you're going to find a lot of Selenium packages, not as much, you know, Playwright helpers. So if there's anything you can package up, like a pytest fixture for a particular way you're using it, package that up. It's always fun to make a PyPy package. So yeah.
Yeah, and I just Peggy just shared on the screen and in chats the link to that Pamela's blog post that she was just showing, because that is a really, really great resource. But yeah, Raphael also said, thanks for the great overview of Playwright. So I also definitely learned a lot because I didn't know about the package before. Also, I don't generally do a lot of web development. I do like scientific Python stuff, but I have websites and I've always just been like, I will manually go do color checking and stuff. Like I knew there were these things to do, but like, yeah. I know what I'll be doing later today.
We're going to figure out how to run this on your Jupyter notebooks, right? Isn't that our next goal?
Yes, I think that would actually be really cool. So stay tuned, folks.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining everybody today. It was great. Lots of great interactions in chat, and hopefully you can try out using some Playwright stuff on your own code, even if it's just for testing your own website or something like that. It definitely is a really, really cool tool to make, especially increase the accessibility of the web. So yeah. You can, thanks, Peggy. You can check out all the rest of the episodes from the Python Pulse here at aka.ms/pythonpulse/playlist. There's lots of other cool videos with other people like myself and Pamela on other episodes, but also tons of other things that are just kind of what's the latest, greatest, what are we excited about here at Microsoft with Python. So yeah, have a great weekend, and we'll see y'all next month. Cheers.